Heard from Mark Zuckerberg, who said that the pushiness, the coerciveness of government meeting with them was unprecedented, and that they pushed back. But he also said worse than them just sort of telling him he should restrict speech. They also threatened him. They threatened to come after him through antitrust law. They threatened to remove parts of, Section 230 of the liability protection. Just to imagine this.
This may look like routine questioning about policy disagreements, but it's actually a confrontation about power. Who holds it, how it's used, and whether any institution can pressure speech without consequence. What's really being tested here is whether government agencies understand the limits of their authority when democratic freedoms are involved. This raises broader questions about accountability, constitutional restraint, and whether America still upholds the principle that citizens, not institutions, define acceptable discourse. In this video, we'll break down how this exchange exposes deeper structural tensions inside Homeland Security, why this matters far beyond politics, and what it reveals about the balance between national responsibility and constitutional integrity.
Serving that role. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, congratulations, Governor Noem. You are almost done.
Okay.
We've been through a lot of questions. I think you've handled the questions very well. And I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and I think the ranking member has a few, and I think we'll be done very shortly. I think a lot of Americans, including some conservatives, misunderstand the First Amendment. They think the First Amendment says that Facebook has to publish my opinion, or the Wall Street Journal has to publish my opinion, or we need to force them to be fair. That's not what the First Amendment's about at all. The First Amendment really doesn't apply to telling private companies what we can or cannot say. YouTube censored me, and I despise their policy. They actually took down speeches I made on the floor. But really, I don't have a legal recourse other than I can complain about YouTube being unfair and not hosting, both sides of an issue. However, with the government, though, there is a rule. The First Amendment specifically says Congress shall pass no law banning or abridging speech. And this is what really got us worried about, what not only the FBI was doing, but the Department of Homeland Security, actually meeting with these companies on a weekly basis. And imagine
What just happened is the redefining of the debate. This isn't about whether platforms are fair. It's about whether federal authority interfered where it legally cannot. This matters because when government pressure enters the informational space, democracy moves away from persuasion and toward control. And if these actions go unexamined, it signals that powerful institutions can shape public dialogue without accountability, something that fundamentally shifts how democratic society functions.
The chilling effect of this. Imagine that there are cameras here, that they're going to end their filming of this interview and then decide, well, what she said or what he said really was misinformation and we should edit that out. Can you imagine? It's just hard for me to imagine that the media has not, which once defended the First Amendment, hasn't been in more of an uproar over the government meeting with the media to decide things. Some of this we didn't know, and then Elon Musk bought Twitter. People asked him, they said, well, you paid $44 billion for Twitter. Isn't that too much? And he said, I paid $44 billion to defend free speech. And it's been an amazing service, not only to open up the forum to more viewpoints, but to point out what the government was doing. In this last week, we heard from Mark Zuckerberg, who said that the pushiness, the coerciveness of government meeting with them was unprecedented, and that they pushed back. But he also said worse than them just sort of telling him he should restrict speech. They also threatened him. They threatened to come after him through antitrust law. They threatened to remove parts of, Section 230 of the.
This exchange establishes something critical. If federal authority was leveraged to influence communication policy, that's not just a policy disagreement. It becomes a constitutional problem. It matters because the line between coordination and coercion defines whether government acts as a guardian of safety or an enforcer of narrative. If that boundary isn't enforced, it sets a precedent where every future administration feels entitled to do the same or worse.
Liability protection. Just to imagine this bully nature of government. And I know you're opposed to that, but if you're confirmed and you're in a position of saying we're just no longer sending people to meet with media, and the way I describe it is to talk about constitutionally protected speech, because some will say, oh, well, what about pornography, or what about child trafficking? Those are illegal. Those are not constitutionally protected speech. You have every ability to meet with that. But for constitutionally protected speech, will you tell us in America that you will no longer be sending government agents to meet with the media?
Yes, Senator, I'll work with you to ensure that civil rights and liberties are protected and that we are not in the misinformation and disinformation space.
Here, the conversation transforms into a test of leadership. It's no longer about theory, it's about policy direction. This matters because leadership at DHS shapes institutional culture. And institutional culture determines whether restraint or overreach defines future behavior. The outcome of this commitment influences how much confidence the public can place in the department's respect for democratic boundaries.
Like the current DHS is.
The only other thing I would ask on this basis is we will send requests. We sent requests previously, sometimes and often bipartisan requests for information. The Twitter files, Michael Schellenberger, Matt Taibbi, Barry Weiss did a great job of showing what was happening in Twitter and how they were cooperating with government. I think the other investigation that needs to occur is who were the people in government they were talking to? Do they still work at DHS? And can we make sure that they're not in a position of authority? And this is not something I'm going to tell you to do. It's just a request that you have your own investigation, that you have people who work for DHS to say, we are going to look for people who are bringing their political bias to work and trying to influence speech and restrict speech based on their bias, and help us in rooting that out and making sure that
This moment moves beyond pledges and into structural responsibility. What matters here is whether an institution is willing to look inward, confront its failures, and correct them transparently. If internal accountability doesn't happen, trust erodes. And without trust, even legitimate national security actions lose credibility. This isn't just about the past, it's about whether DHS can be trusted going forward.
these people never again have that responsibility, because I think that I don't think there's ever been anything like this as far as the restriction of speech. And I think the election is largely going to stop and tilt things the other way. But will you help us by looking internally for those who are trying to restrict speech?
Senator, I look forward to working with you on that mission.
I don't have any other questions now, but I think Senator Peters and Senator Blumenthal, and we'll see how it goes. We're going to start with Senator Peters with one more 5-minute round.
What we witnessed is larger than a nomination hearing. It's a referendum on institutional restraint in a constitutional system. When federal agencies operate near the boundaries of their authority, the question isn't simply whether they meant well, but whether they respected democratic limits. That distinction defines the difference between governance and control. Accountability is not optional. It is necessary for legitimacy. If institutions acknowledge mistakes, reform, and commit to transparency, trust can be rebuilt. If they do not, democratic stability weakens. The stakes extend beyond any individual hearing. They reach into the future of how power is exercised in America. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA.